dye on white paper. This is just multimedia paper. I just did this yesterday to show you. But you can see the color difference between this bright, brilliant, clear blue and how it looks on wood. Yellow, it's a little bit warmer, maybe leans a little orange, you don't really notice. The red, can't really tell the difference. So when you're looking at the colors, you specifically want to see how they're going to react with your wood. These are maple veneer business cards. You can get them from Lee Valley in like giant stacks. And what I like to do is test on them, and then you can write what you did on the back, and then you can keep a reference, and then you can lose them, and every couple of years make a new set. Another thing is how the colors go over each other. So here's blue, and here's what happens if you put yellow and red over it. And then I also tested different finishes to see the color change. Here's yellow, and here's red. And what you might notice is that you don't get a very good purple. It's because you're fighting with yellow of the wood underneath, and also not all blues and reds make purple. So one thing I do have is gentian violet or crystal violet. It's something you used to paint people up if they got fungal infections or something, but it's a very beautiful purple. It does show up over the wood, and it specifically binds with cellulose, so that's an option if you want purple, or you could buy purple dye. It's just, I happen to have that. When I tested these, I also, like I said, tested for the finishing. These ones are pretty old. It was more noticeable when I first did it, but there is a difference between shellac and polyurethane. This is shellac on the top and polyurethane. For me, I generally like an oil finish because it's safe. Like it's good for if you're around perfumes, hairsprays, stuff like that. Or just enjoy, like shellac, I find sometimes I can pick up fingerprints if people have particularly acidic fingers, or if somebody sprays Windex near it, the ammonia will ruin it. So I like oil-based finishes, but in order to keep, so this one is shellac, but in order to keep the vibrancy of the dye, I like to put shellac over it first, the wax-free shellac, the flakes, and then put my oil-based polyurethane finish over it. So after testing it, that's what I found worked for me. But everybody, you know, do your own thing. I don't know about that. When you're mixing colors, I'll go into this too with some examples, but it makes a difference how you're mixing it. If you just try, this is mixing it dry, so this is just painting blue on top of yellow, and there's not a lot of mixing going on. If you mix up your transition colors, so this is wet blending, so this is trying to paint red, paint the yellow while the red is still wet, paint the blue. That kind of works, but this is making your transition colors, so mixing blue, mixing a green, yellowy green, blah, blah, blah. That worked the best, and then another way I found to get good transition is to fade out from, I'll do an example of that. To fade out, if you start out with red, and then you fade out with water until that disappears, and then you do your blue or your yellow.
Whoa. Is that a message?
So if you do your what did I say, like your red, and then you fade out to clear, to water, and on the other side, let's say you start with your yellow, and then you fade in this way. And I found that also gives a good transition, because I find when you're doing the wet blending, if you're doing a big piece, you're fighting with time because it's water-based and it's drying so fast.
We're on the floor.
It's lost one of its hangers, that's what's wrong with it.
So these are the vibrant colors. You can also get more muted hues. These are kind of greeny oranges. And personally, I like that. I mean, you know, it depends on what project you're working on, but I did this one initially in a really vibrant orange, and I was like, oh yeah, I hate that. So I put green over it, and the green muted the orange enough to, I sanded it, but because the orange had really gone on into those fibers that were sticking straight out, I couldn't get the orange all the way off unless I returned it. So then I put the green on it. The green muted the orange a little bit, and then it gave it an interest. You can do really interesting things with it. So you can make more muted colors that way. And this one, I didn't use like a you know, a straight yellow-green mix. I added a little bit of red to it, I messed around with it, and I'll show you some of that color mixing today. So when you're thinking of adding color, don't worry that it's going to turn out cartoonish. It's not going to look like, it doesn't have to look like this. You can get a whole range of browns and grays and even blacks just with these three colors. This is crimson red, this is lemon yellow, and this is bright blue. And these are from Lee Valley. I wore all black because I was super afraid of spraying myself with this. So these are aniline wood stains. They come in a package like this. And I made a little scoop, and I measure out my scoops into these little bottles, which leak. So I don't suggest you use these. I can see some of it's leaking already. So I mix, for me, I use like 12 scoops bright blue in here, and I have my own little scoop that I made. And that way it's consistent. I know every time with it's what strength of blue I'm working with. If I want a darker color, I can like, I use an ice cube tray actually, but I couldn't find it. So you could use something like this. And you can add a little bit of extra powder in here and mix it up. You don't want to add too much because it just won't dissolve and you'll end up with crystals and stuff. So I found 12 works for me for the vibrancy that I want. You can always go back and do extra layers and stuff. So these are aniline wood dyes. These are from Lee Valley. I don't know how much they are anymore because I bought them years ago. But with these three colors, you can do lovely browns and greens. You can. I try to mimic like mahogany and you know, oh, I forget what it's called, like a yellow heart or an orange, a sage orange or something like that. You can get a lot of different colors. So just with three, and even blacks. So if you wanted to try it, that would be an easy way to start. I would not suggest starting just with one because you're not going to get that depth of color. I've dyed things where, like, I've dyed things where I dyed it just blue, and then I didn't like it. You sand back and you add a little red, and you sand back and you add green to other areas, and it just gives it so much more depth. You can do just one color, but just don't. It's not as deep. It's not as rich. Like you wanna add to the piece. You don't want to make it handmade, not homemade. All right.
Nicole?
Yes.
What is the liquid base for that paint?
Water. You can use alcohol, I think, but I use water. Let me just double check if you can use alcohol because it'll say on here. No, this one just is water. So it's supposed to be safe. Like you can use it on stuff for kids. I don't know if I would. Did I? Have I? No, I haven't. So I haven't tested that personally. So this is wood-based aniline dye powder from Lee Valley, and this is gentian violet, which is probably not sold.
I've heard that expression often, but I've never understood it. What makes aniline dye aniline? What is it? Why is it? Why not another name? Why is it?
It's,
Usually I'd be into that. Go ahead.
it's where the dye comes from. It's a petroleum product, I believe.
Oh yeah.
Coal.
Yes, I do remember reading about that. It was a really big deal when they discovered it too, because before that there wasn't a lot of color fast dyes. Most of the other dyes, vegetable dyes, are non-light fast, and that's why it has to be chemical dyes. Is aniline the chemical, or?
Do they have a particular characteristic besides just the color?
These, because besides the color, what do you mean? They don't necessarily bind particularly well with cellulose. It's not like India ink or the gentian violet. They are light fast to a point. I understand that people who make, you know, like in the world of wood turners, there have been people who said they don't last if you put them in a sunny window of a store for years and years.
Nothing.
Yeah, nothing gold will ever stay. The thing about these though is that they are a permanent dye. There's not a lot of other things that I would trust to be light fast besides these stains and some of the top artist pigments that you can get. So you can buy, if you go to like Kama Pigments, you can buy different pigments there. Some of them are like, what is it called, like earth derivative. They're like yellow ochre or cadmium red. I don't even think you can buy cadmium red anymore because that has cadmium in it. So those are pigments that would sit on top of your piece, whereas these ones, they bind. They're a chemical, so they bind to it. And that's what we're looking for, because we want to maximize the visibility of the grain. You want to see the chatoyancy. So, aniline dyes.
Nicole, have you tried alcohol with it?
I haven't. I know that you can use it and you can flash it off easily. Because I sand back every time I'm applying layers and layers of dye, I would do no less than 3. By the time I get to the last layer, it's like the speed of the alcohol. I have a little space heater, and I just stick my stuff in front of there and let it dry. Have you used the alcohol?
No, but I've used the water,
Mm-hmm.
and on a thin wall, the bowl similar to yours,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe it's not the reason for it, but it cracked because it's water based.
It's water based. So was it a very thin piece?
Well, not, probably like yours there, and it cracked. Well, that might not have been the reason for the crack, but
Yeah, I've used it, and you can't let it drip on. Usually I do it on the lathe, actually. And I've never had a problem with it cracking. I had problems where it'll swell up the fibers. This box, it's doing that right now. This is like one of the first pieces I made. I've had it so that the tenon swelled up, and then it would no longer fit, and I had to sand it back. So it had swelling. It definitely raises a little bit of fuzz, but I've never had it warp or crack. But maybe it's just luck.
Aniline dye comes in coal tar.
Yeah, dinosaurs, pre-dinosaur.
Nicole, those packages of dyes, I know they go a long way.
Oh my God, they go so
you need
far.
very little to make a sample like that.
For this,
Yeah.
I used about like that much
Yeah.
dye. It's so like an inch of dye.
Mine, I'm sharing with somebody else.
Yeah. Well, I've had these for like 7 or 10 years. I've had those for a really long time, and this is only maybe the 3rd batch that I've made. Like this, you wouldn't even see a drop just to color this bowl. So
It
yeah,
goes a long
it goes a
way.
long way.
Yeah,
Yeah. Right. So
Nicole, I have a question. I follow Eric Lofstrom,
Yeah.
and he does a lot of this painting in his board, right? The domestic boards, and he says to use the 1 pound shellac primer for the wood. In all his woodwork, he always uses the 1 pound shellac primer.
before he adds the dye,
Before he puts the paint on.
paint. Yes.
Yeah.
Dye.
So that may prevent the paint from cracking or something. I don't know why he's using that.
No.
Can do that.
It's a sealer. Anything for doing this kind of dye, because you want it to bind with the cellulose. You don't want to have a film of anything over it. The shellac I do use afterwards, because I think the shellac protects the color from changing too much. You don't get as much penetration of the oil-based finishes. But if you put the shellac on first and then try to dye, you might dye the shellac.
It's very light shellac, 1 pound, so it's like more alcohol than shellac.
Yeah.
Very, very light.
I still wouldn't, because you're adding a film to it. But it would be good to test it, because that's just like me thinking about the film and the chemistry and how it would work. But maybe it does work. I do, like if you're staining something, like if you're staining a table, you would add wood conditioner, especially to the end grain, just so that it doesn't absorb as much into the end grain, so you don't get like black on the ends. But that's specifically forming a film finish so that you don't get as much penetration. Whereas with the dye, you want the penetration. And he is turning end grain. Yeah, so that's probably what he's trying to do, is avoid it being just, like you'll see when I do this piece, it's going to be much, much darker on that end grain. But when dyeing, if you're painting it, absolutely. If you're putting a stain on it, the stain, and yeah, like a wood stain, it's a pigment, it's sitting on the surface, it's not going into it as much. In that case, yeah, then you would use the shellac. It's the same thing, I think that's what wood conditioner is, isn't it? Or is it thinned out poly? It's sanding sealer is thinned out shellac.
I think it's a pure shellac. You actually put the seal.
That's exactly it. Yeah, there's no.
It will not take in
It won't take it in. Yeah, I mean, you could use that for interesting artistic effects. You could use that to mask, or you could use that, apply it, and then sand back pretty far, and then instead of getting the dark spots in the parts of your grain that are sticking out, if you've got shellac there that penetrated, and on these parts, the shellac was sitting on a film and you sand that off, maybe you would get the inverted version of this. Maybe you would get like light stripes where the grain is coming up and dark stripes where it goes across. So it might be an interesting experience. That's actually really interesting, and I think I kind of want to try that now. But for me, I go with clear, plain wood. If I'm handling it too much, I might even sand it again, because I don't even want my oils, hand oils on there. I haven't seen it as much as wood, but for watercolor, for sure, if you're resting your hand there, you can get the oil transfer, and then you don't get good washes, because your oils are stopping it from penetrating and sticking to it. So, yeah, so I would avoid even that. If I was painting, absolutely. I always put something on if I'm painting, because you don't want to waste all your paint just being sucked into the wood grain. So I spoke a little bit about the underlying color of the wood. This one is sort of a yellowy. This one has a little bit of orange in it. Some woods, you know, obviously if it's darker here and lighter here, you're going to see the difference. And this graying, you will absolutely see that through the dye. I mean, you have to accept that you're not painting it, but it will help make it more uniform if you do the dye over it. And when can you see this little, yeah. This is just a color wheel. You know, your primary colors are red, blue, and yellow, and then your opposites are your contrasting colors. So red and blue make purple, and the opposite of purple is yellow. So that's why I say if you're trying to dye something purple, it's very difficult, because you're going to have yellow undertones in the woods. It's going to brown out. If you're dyeing something green and red, those aren't too bad, because green has a little red in it. Red is kind of on the warm side. I find those tend to work out the best. If you're dyeing something red, but you find you don't want this kind of crimson red, you want to have something a little more muted. You can really see that in there. This is more of a burgundy, and you can get this, so you start out with the red, and you kind of lean it towards purple, but you don't want it to be too purple, so you add a little bit of yellow into it, and you bring it from here somewhere down there. So you're not stuck with just two colors. You can add a little bit of the contrasting colors. So if you mix up a green, so blue and yellow, and you find it too brilliant, like this one, if this was straight, you know, this color, it would look cartoonish, and I wanted something that looked more natural. So in order to tone it down, I added a little bit of the opposite color, so green, and then add a little bit of red, not a whole lot, just enough to bring it in so that it's not so brilliant anymore. I should have done those bigger. And here you can see, yeah, the same thing. So this was an orange, and I wanted it to be more like a mahogany color, so it started off orange, so I added a little bit of blue, and that tones it down a little bit. Yeah, and here was a green, and I wanted it to be a more neutral green, so I added a little bit of red in it. So you can play around with that. To do that, I would suggest you don't have to, I mean, I don't know what I'm talking about. I like to measure things. So this is, you can pull out a fixed amount, add it to your dye, and then that way you can write up your recipes. So, you know, like 1 part blue to 3 or 4 parts yellow will give you a nice green, and then you can add like 4 drops of red to heat it down. Let's see, yeah, 2 colors is best for depth. This, for example, isn't just red, it's obviously red, but I actually first dyed it purple, so blue and red mixed together, and let that sink in as deeply as possible. Then I sanded that back, then I painted the whole thing with the red dye, then I sanded back just a section of that, and then painted the whole thing with yellow. So if I had just done that red, it would have fallen a little bit flat, but because there's all these other layers in, I think, to me, I like this more because it really accentuates the figure that's coming from the burl. There's a burl on the other side. So I didn't add this detail, but I did color it and then sand it back. So again, when you sand back anything that's pointed this way, the dye is going to go deeper into it. Anything that's this way, it's going to sit more on top. So you're going to remove this layer and have clear wood, and then you'll have the colored wood there. I'll show you in a second. And I would always suggest using 2 colors. It's just more natural. It gives more depth. And you can get by with just 3 dyes, and that's what I was talking about before. The rest of this is just to show you. So, any questions about like the color theory or anything like that so far? That's the talky part, and now's the dewy part.
Okay, I'd like to just fix the cameras a little better for that.
Sorry, Nicole, the burl piece, you start with purple?
Yeah, I did purple.
Yeah,
and
on
then
the whole thing?
On the whole thing.
Yeah.
And then sanded that back. And then I did red on the whole thing. And then I lightly sanded the red because it raised the grain. And then I sanded it a little more deep in here because I wanted, you know, usually when you're doing something you want to add depth, you would do dark for the things that are away and bright, especially red for the things that are closer. But I wanted this to look glowing, so I sanded it more here until I could see bare wood. Then put a wash of yellow-orange over the whole thing. The yellow-orange and the red neutralized this purple and turned it black, which is what I had anticipated all along. And then it warmed up this red, because that red's a pretty cool tone red. If you, no, it's the warm. Yeah, it's a pretty cool tone red, which I specifically chose because I knew I wanted to counteract the yellow wood. There are different colors of red. This is crimson red, there's another red, and then there's a peacock blue. I think there's only one yellow, it's the lemon yellow. For me, I chose the cooler colors specifically because I wanted to counteract the yellow in the wood.
How long do you wait between coats?
Till it's dry. So like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, depends on the piece, how much you dyed.
And you sand at what grit?
I do 220.
220?
220.
Between coats?
Between coats, yeah. Because you want it to be enough that you're removing some of the wood, but you don't want to take off too much wood and have to go through all the layers again. And towards the end, you're just taking not even a hair off of it. So.
Are you turning well, or is it done by hand?
I prefer to do it on the lathe because you have I was going to bring a turntable because that was going to be my way to do it on the lathe. I prefer to do it on the lathe because I have my light set up like this, so I'm getting as bright light as I can, and I have the heater set up facing it. It's just that little space heater facing it. So I'll put the dye on it by hand, spin it around to make sure that, especially if I'm doing graduations from like inside to outside, it's easier to do it while you spin it by hand, not while it's running. I think then you end up with blue freckles if you try to do that. So yeah, I would do it by hand and then I'd turn the heater on, go upstairs, have a coffee, come back downstairs, and sand with the lathe on. Unless I'm doing very specific point sanding, if I'm just doing like here. But for this one, yeah, I would sand with the lathe on. Very, very light touch though. Because what can happen is you can burn out a ring, and then you have to sand the whole thing back and go all over again. Okay, so I have another block of wood.
What is the method of application of the paint? What do you use? Brush or cheesecloth, sponge?
I use brushes. And I'm gonna do some. Just thought I had another piece of wood here too. Maybe
Underneath?
No, it's okay. I mean, I've got this. It's okay. Oh, there it is. Okay, that's coloring and sanding back. Okay, so normally I use an ice cube tray because it's stable and it has nice big cups to hold the wood, to hold the dye. But I'll use this for today because that's what I found. So let's see. Let's start with coloring and sanding back. Anybody have color preferences?
red, white and blue?
Pink and green.
Well, we've been seeing it an awful lot recently.
I'm not gonna measure because I don't care. It's not, we're not doing anything that can't be sanded back.
It doesn't stain your hands or anything?
It does, it's a very good point. That's why I've got these gloves. And it stains for a long time if you've ever done it. It'll last like, I don't know, on me it's lasted like almost a week.
So yeah,
Yeah, you've seen it, yeah.
I used a powder stain mixed with, wood alcohol. And I got it on my hands up to my elbows. And my girlfriend wouldn't let me touch it for a week. So, yeah, not
What did she think about the dye on your hands though?
Did she like the color?
It's a pity my hearing isn't more acute. I might have caught that because it was a good one, obviously.
Alright, what am I doing? I'll do red, I'll do blue next. You notice I'm cleaning out the syringe in between because obviously you don't want to muddy up your colors right away. You want to muddy them up later, but not right now. So I'm just putting the diluted dye aside in case I want to use that for mixing. I've got a big chunk of water.
It's a handy little tray.
This is just from the dollar store, it's nice.
Yeah.
Do you want some more ice cube trays? I've got bunches of them.
No, one is enough. I'm good. Alright.
But you can't find it.
Well, I'm sure some crazy person made ice in it or something like that. Now, I said yes about the gloves, and then I completely ignored myself. Don't tell Mom. She's always on me about wearing gloves. Those are not, they worked for a few years and then the seal failed on them or something. They're not very watertight. Let's try.
Painter's cream.
What is that?
Painter's cream. You apply to cream your hand, the paint as a sticker.
Does it work like clean orange?
It's like a,
Does it smell as good as clean orange?
it's like a glove, they call it. It's an invisible glove.
Oh yeah, I heard that. Oh, I probably remember to put that on after I stain my hands, just like I do these anyway. Alright, let's do this properly. I'm using yellow and you can't even see the yellow anyway. Alright. That part is necessary? No. You can pour it into a little dish. I am particular about my colors. If you're just doing something for fun or a little curiosity thing, then you don't have to worry about it. I mentioned that when I did the show and tell. Don't get hung up on doing big things. I'll tell you, when I started doing stupid little things, it's just like, poof. Because you don't care, and you don't mind if you screw it up, and you don't mind if you waste it, because you're only wasting a little bit. So I'm a really big fan of doing little things. Do jewelry, do like dumb little bug things. I'm actually gonna move this because this isn't dumb. This is a pretty dumb bug thing. Okay.
You can drain on the bottom of your bowl.
What's that? All right. Is it? Oh, I'm facing that way now. So I've got my three colors here. I'm just going to start by, I'm going to show you what happens when you color and sand back. I'll just check my heater can turn on before I do that. Okay. So I brought a bunch of projects because each one takes time to dry in between, so I thought, well, let's just like bust through a bunch of them, and then if we have time to go back, then great, and if not, no. So here, I'm just using a regular, these are dollar store paintbrushes because I've done it with the fancy brushes. It doesn't work any better or worse. So I want to accentuate these. They're, I don't know, it's not bird's eye. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's bird's eye. I'll find out. So I'm going to put some dye on there. I'm just using it straight. and we'll let that dry and sand that. That's specifically what I want to show you on here. So if you left it like that, you can kind of get an idea of it. It's not, I once read about carving little figurines and stuff. Blue can like overpower everything. So I'm not a huge fan of it. That's why I used it as a base coat, because I want to sand it back and show you how to neutralize it. So we'll start with that, and then what I do is set it up in front of a little space heater. Alright, we'll put it up like that. Okay. Then I was going to show how darker woods can affect the color, and for this one I'm going to mix up a green. When you're mixing up dyes, I don't know if this is true of everything, like every kind of coloring that you can get, but I find the yellow dyes are generally weaker and that the blue dyes are very strong. So if I want to mix up a green, I'm going to take a fair bit of yellow before I dip into the blue, and I'm less concerned about contaminating my blue than I am contaminating my yellow. So that was like, what, 2 or 3 drops of yellow, and you can see it's, let me do one here. It's a decent green. So the ratio is like, it's not 1-to-1 for coloring. You gotta test out what kind of the dyes are gonna work. So even though that was a pretty vibrant green on the paper towel, so this is the color of the green on the paper towel. You can see how much muted down that got by the color of the wood. Okay, so that came out as a decent natural color. Let's say I want to paint, well, let's say I'm going to do like kind of a landscape scene. So I want to have some blue on the bottom. Let's do some blue on the bottom, and then have some, let's mix up some green again. Kind of a yellowy green. It's not, the color, like it doesn't blend well. So what you want to do, there's a lot of different things you can do. What I find works very well is if instead of doing it like that, I take some of the blue. Let's say I start up here, I'm going to go backwards. So I take my blue, and I'm going to fade it down with each color until it pretty much disappears. Then I'm going to switch to my yellow. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to fade that up.
Question, how are you fading? Just like brush technique?
That's what I'm saying now, yeah.
Okay.
So what I'm doing is, I didn't say on the back side as much, but let's see it again. So instead of doing the stripes, just the strips, and then painting a strip next to it, you're going to get bleeding if you do that. So what I would do is I would paint like this, and then I would come in and I would just pick up some water and dilute it, and each successive pass has more and more water on it, until you're coming away with pretty much nothing. Now, what I would suggest, if you then try to add yellow to that, if you don't dry it first, if you then try to add yellow, you've already filled up your wood a little bit with the water, so you almost want to dry it again before you go over it again, but I was doing it fast. So actually, I can show you one here because we're going to see the difference. Here you can see, because I faded it, it's a little bit lighter here, and then I'm going to let this one dry, and then I'll blend in on that. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to show you. So if you want to have individual strips of color, if they're next to each other, you either have to cut a V groove in or burn something. So if I do that, then I can color this blue, no problem. I don't get, what do you call it? I don't get any bleeding from it. And I can even paint very light colors next to very dark colors. And it's reasonably shaky too, so you can see it's pretty forgiving if you have the burn marks in it. So here, and then I'll come in with the yellow. screwed up that one because I missed it. But you can see you've got really crisp lines between the colors. If I try to do the same thing here without the burn marks, it's already bleeding and I haven't even done anything yet. So, I mean, I put the same amount of care into making those lines as I did those lines. If you want to do side-by-side colors with no bleeding, you need to put some kind of burn lines in there, and that'll stop the color from bleeding from one section to the other. Oh, except for that one that my hand shook. Okay. So I'll put that here to dry. This one is pretty dry, but yeah, I'll do this next. All right. So this is the one that was blue. I'm going to actually sand with 150 because I want to go quickly. Sort of obviously sand against the grain, not with the grain. So you're looking to remove material, you're not trying to hide sanding marks.
What grip is that?
That was 150, and that's because I wanted to go quickly. If I'm doing it on the lathe, I would use 220. So I used 150, and now I'm going to come in with 220 to clean it up. You can see my wood prep on this wasn't very good. I just threw it on the belt sander. I have no idea what's on the belt sander right now. So anywhere where it's kind of gripped, you can see there's a little bit darker marks. I'm going to see if I can get rid of that even. Yeah, I can take that down. So you can get to the point where you only have the dye in the figured area of the wood if you're diligent with your sanding and you prep your wood better than I had here. So there. Cross grain for speed, with the grain for finish. All right. So it looks like I've taken everything off, but there's still something in the eyes there. So let's dye that. Let's do a red, because I think that'll make it stand out nicely.
Could you show us that before you put paint?
Yep, that's all right.
Oh, cool.
So you sand it right back. The only spot you're going to see the color is in the eyes here. Because I didn't sand the wood perfectly, you can see some like tear out or whatever came from the planer that I was on. So now I'm going to dye it red. And red, it's not as strong as the blue, but you're going to see, like I'm going to try to warm up that red a little bit, but you worry more about contaminating the yellow than you do the red. So here's kind of an orangey red I've mixed up. This is it's a very cool tone right now, and now I'm going to paint over this. Paint over it, I'm going to dye over it. And normally I would say like clean it off properly and everything because I can see here there's some sawdust left in here and it's kind of a pain in the butt. Okay. So now it's a lot warmer and you can see those eyes really pop. That's a big difference from what it was before.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I chose a red, but I mean if you do this, what I was going to say, I did bring some bird's eye maple. Let's see if we have time because it'll take some fussing. What you can do is mix up, instead of mixing up a blue, mix up something that's more like a warmer green, and then put like and sand it down and then put a warm brown over that. And what's going to happen is you're going to make the bird's eye pop, but it's still going to look like a natural color. In fact, you could even sand it all the way back down to the raw wood if you want it, but it's going to make the bird's eye stand out without losing the chatoyancy. So it's transparent, it's not translucent, it's not opaque, it's transparent. So you can see through it and you're still going to get that color shift when you put a finish on it, not right now. So let's let this one dry, then I'll sand back and then put a warmer yellowy orange over it. Okay, so that went from that gross bright blue to that. Let's see if this one that's dry enough. All right, and then we'll compare this to transitioning. This is This was the blue, this one was transitioned, this was paint blue, paint yellow next to it, and you can see the line. This is paint blue, faded out with water, paint yellow, faded up with water, but in between you lose some of the color. So now I'm just going to paint yellow and fade it out with water in this direction.
Are you using dye or is that a paint?
This is, I'm saying paint, I'm sorry, I am saying paint, but I mean dye.
It's a dye, okay.
Yeah, all of this is dye, I'm not using any of the paint. No, I'm not using any of the paint today, I had to think about what I was doing. So now I'm using yellow, and this time I'm painting the yellow down until I hit the blue. And I'm going to fade it out like that until we end up on the blue. Okay, so this one, it's not, I mean, like I said, I didn't super prepare this wood. In fact, this is the back of the piece. I didn't prepare this side at all. But you have a better transition from your yellow to your blue when you do it this way. So going just one next to the other, you're going to get a line. Fading it with water is better, and it's a good way to get a nice gradual finish. And because I often do layers and layers of dye, this is okay for me. But if you're just doing one coat and you're fading from one color to the other, do one coat, dilute it until you're painting with until you're staining with water, and then do the graduation in the other direction. And that's nice. Like if you're doing, I like to do bowls with like the brighter part in the center so it's glowing. So if you want to do your bowl, you would do your outside with, let's say, the blue, fade it out until it's nothing but water in the inside, dry it, then do your yellow and fade up until it's nothing water on the outside. That's a nice way to add depth. You can also go the other way and it gives you more perspective or whatever that's called, but that's the way I like to do it.
Nicole, have you ever tried a mixture of water and alcohol during the process?
Yeah, I have. It worked quite well.
I prefer alcohol and lemonade, yeah.
The drinkable type.
No, I've never done that because usually I don't mind taking a little bit of time to step away from it. Usually I batch stuff, especially if I'm doing jewelry like the necklaces and stuff. Those are small. Stick it in front of the heater and batch through.
Will the effect be the same with alcohol?
I hear.
Except I imagine it would dry faster, you know?
I hear, but I have not tested it, that the alcohol-based are not as vibrant as the water-based. So when I was purchasing mine, I wanted it as vibrant as possible because you can always knock color back, but you can't add vibrancy. That's what I heard, but I haven't tested it. Did you have a question in the back or no? Okay, yeah.
Have you ever wet the wood before applying your dye?
Yep.
What kind of effect does that do?
So because it's like you have a series of straws, because
Yeah.
you're filling up the straws already, you're not going to get as penetrative. Okay. Actually, I am going to tell you one of the secrets. To maximize penetration depth, I like to add a non-foaming surfactant. So that breaks down the surface tension of water and it lets it be drawn deeper in. I wasn't going to tell you guys, this is like the secret chemistry thing. It allows the water to be drawn deeper into the wood. So by wetting it, you are going to reduce the dye uptake by the wood, which I have used on purpose. So if I was doing that color transition, maybe I would add water to the bright blue part because I specifically don't want the yellow to creep up there, and then start painting the yellow and fade to water. So yes, you can use it, and the way you would use it is to reduce the color uptake.
So what was that secret?
Oh, I forget. Yeah. It's a non-foaming surfactant. You can ask me later and I'll tell you more. Okay, so those were the test pieces. And then I wanted to show you the effect of using the dyes on an end grain piece and like a faceplate piece. And then if we have time, I don't even know what time it is. If we have time, I can talk to you more about this. This was just a piece of campfire wood. And I carved it and textured it with the Dremel, and then I burnt it, and I was going to show you how to burn it, and then we're going to dye it, because I think that'll give a nice richness to it. It's adding texture, it's adding color, and it's making something that is literally a piece of junk, like it was literally from the campfire. Oh, I guess it's going to be blue. All right, I'm going to stain this just red. I'm just going to make one of those fly agaric mushrooms because they're popular.
question, Nicole. When you're doing end grain, is that advisable to start with a more diluted version of whatever color you want?
Yes.
What if you sealed just the end grain portion? Oh, it's not going to stick.
I wouldn't. The reason I wouldn't seal is I just don't trust sealers to be as predictable as, because you can't take it away unless you really turn it down. You can sand it down, but even then you don't know how deep it penetrated, especially on end grain. So for this, I was going to wet it down first so that it doesn't take up too much, but I also kind of do want you to see the difference, because it's quite striking, the difference between end grain versus side grain. So I'll put a little bit of water on the top and let that soak in a bit. And then we're going to mix up. Yeah. So I don't mind about mixing my colors anymore, because it's all the... Alright. Probably added too much water. So this is just like a little, I mean, this is fogwood. I'm pretty sure it's maple. It took seconds to turn. Usually I make them into boxes, but I just didn't this time because I am a little bit concerned for the swelling of the wood fibers. And since I was doing a demo and I didn't know if I was going to slip and get it on the tenon, I didn't know if that was going to be a problem. So here you can see the difference in how the stain takes up in the heartwood versus the sapwood, yeah. So that's another thing to consider if you're doing something like with a lot of grain color, and you can still see it through it, which can be a nice effect. It can be what you want, but if you're looking for something more uniform, that's when you would look more towards stains, like you know, usual wood stains. They sit on the surface more. They're not going to penetrate into the wood and show you all the color variations.
And that's just red?
Nope, this is red and yellow. So I mixed, I took some yellow in here and added some red and made it a red with yellow in it, and then I added some red here to make it yellow with red in it. And it's just because, again, I don't like one color. I think it looks a little flat with one color. So we'll put that on. It's not as striking as I'd hoped, probably because I added the water to the top part, and I'm adding just straight red on the bottom here. Because it's already wet with dye, this should give a good transition. What you don't want, though, is to add a ton of dye, then let it dry, and then you just have dye sitting on top of your wood, because then you're just going to sand it off, which is kind of a waste of dye. All right. Yeah, that's all right. So maybe I'll add just like one more pass of yellow just to unify it. So that was pretty quick. It's
transformation.
It's yeah, and then, you know, afterwards I'll probably put a finish on it, stick some moss on it, and we'll let that dry. Fast, easy, good way to test it. It was virtually free. I mean, I bought the dye, but if you're looking for a way to test it, ladies seem to like these, I guess. I like them. So we'll put that there. So you can see that little space heater, these are dry now. It's great. It doesn't take that long to dry it. The next one was this bowl. So that we'll see as it dries. It's going to be darker on top, and it is going to fade to a brighter red down here, but the uptake is different. Here's a bowl. Let's dye this sort of a bluish, greenish thing like that, so you can see the different ways to neutralize green so that they're not so cartoonish. And so you saw how much yellow I put in there, and just that little bit of blue was enough to turn it kind of a turquoise color. I'm going to do another shot of yellow next to it. And just pick up a little bit of this green. Okay. So here's a face one. This is a case of wood that's it's got nothing going for it. It's not beautiful. Even if I put a lovely finish on it, it's still going to be kind of boring. So let's make it into something a little more interesting. I'm putting a yellowy green in the center. And I'm going to fade up. And then I'm going to put another green coming down, but I want that green to be sort of a mossy green. So I'm doing the fade, and then I'm stopping, and then on the inside there, there's a couple of V grooves there. On the inside of that V groove, I think I want it to be a really vibrant. Oh, it's too red. Make it a little orangier. Make it a reddish orange color here. You can see as I'm painting it, the V grooves are really stopping the color from going anywhere further. Should pay a little bit of attention as I'm doing it. I'm probably, I'll go through and maybe either paint those or gold leaf them or burn them, do something to make them a little more attractive than what they are now. So let's go and do that. If you do watercolor, it's pretty similar. Depending on the wood, you're going to get similar effects. The difference is you have grain and you don't have grain in paper. What else was I going to say about that? The dyes, these colors will separate a little bit. If you check out the book where I did the testing on the multimedia paper, I did find that the colors separated a little bit. They're a little bit granular. Same thing as in watercolors too. Some of them will, I don't know if it's the pigments separating out or what, but sometimes you can see the colors separating. When it's on the wood, you don't notice it, but I noticed it on the paper. All right. Good enough for now. There you can see it's starting to dry. So it's gone from that really vibrant color, that's what it'll look like when it's finished, to this softer color. Right there. So let's do something. Am I allowed to burn? Yep. What a day. All right. So with this, when I was, I used 2 different bits to get this. First I carved it. It was literally like it's the end of a log. Cut off. I was just going to show you all the different textures that you can get with the Dremel, and then I started to like it, and then I was like, oh, let's make something with this. So the main texture is this saw. I don't know if you can see the size of it. So these just fit. Does anyone want to hear about this, or do you already know about it?
Definitely want to hear about it.
Okay, it's an 1/8" shank saber tooth bit. It's made with carbide. It's got spikes coming off it in all directions. The difference between this and, did I bring? I don't know if I brought a regular, you know the bits with the flutes in them? I don't know, one of these, like a router bit or something?
Yeah.
These will grab and pull with the grain. They're really grain dependent, which is fine if you're doing something like, I used a bit like this to do the inside of that because it was all end grain. But if you're trying to carve around something, these will tend to grab. These don't. So they don't tend to whip around on you, but they do and they hurt. Don't do it. They go pretty fast. These are the yellow, these are fine. These are the green, these are coarse. The orange is extra coarse, and then there's a whisper bit that's even finer. I think it's 80 grit sandpaper, something like that. They carve reasonably fast. They're all one piece, so you can use them at you can use them in like, what do you call the ones with compressed air? We were just talking about it.
Or die grinder?
Yeah, like a die grinder or something like that. You can safely use these in there. I use these on a Dremel. Yeah, I just use it on a Dremel. So it's a little bit slower, but it's okay. So yeah, you use, I think I use this cylindrical bit first to do all the shaping. And then all you do, here's the unburned side. All you do is you just hold it there, and you know when you're sanding, you're supposed to move your sandpaper around so you don't get the lines. This is the exact opposite. I leave it there on purpose to get the lines, to get this repeating pattern, and just touch it, touch it, touch it. And then up here, I use this longer bit. So here the lines are going parallel to the cut, and up here I used it so the lines are going perpendicular to the cut. And then because like that, it's like, it's okay, it's fine. But it's much better when you burn it. So this is, usually I would use your regular, like a regular torch, or a little blowtorch, not a map or anything like that. that this is the creme brulee one. There we go.
Used by
You got a
chefs
camera?
to do creme brulee.
So the good thing about this is, like Betty was saying when she gave her demo, is that you don't have to sand. I didn't sand anything on this, and it did make me really happy to not have to sand. If you can see, I don't want to burn myself, but
Big stuff.
I'll try my best. So no sanding, and it's giving like a nice definition on this. Move around, don't hang out in one spot. This size, I don't know about this size, but I've done plates and bowls. Oh, I did a big bowl. Let's see. All right. So there, it's a little more interesting like that. I have done a big bowl, and if you are here and then you go here, it's going to crack. You have to go here and then here and then here and here. You have to keep going back and forth. Don't stay in one spot too long. If it lights on fire, you're doing it right. But you don't want to have concentrated heat in one area. If there's any defects, it will crack, and then if it just wants to, it will crack. That was a big one. All right, so we've burnt this. It adds to the texture. Let's color it, because we're doing that today. So this time I'm taking some of that green, but I don't want it to be a vibrant green. So the opposite of green, so green is made of blue and yellow, the last one left is red, so I'm going to want to add a little bit of red to it to kind of tone it down. That was too much red. Let's go the other way, add the orange to the green. Alright, there we've got like a nice sort of muted green. Okay, it's not as vibrant as it was before. So, let's use this big brush. I'm going to mix some more yellow into that because we're going to need a lot to cover this. It's more texture, it's more surface area, it's going to need more color. I won't do the whole piece, I don't think. I'll just give you an idea of how it can be. So what I wanted to show specifically in this is, instead of just using one flat color, how to go in and touch up with different shadings. I'll just do a base layer of the green first. And to finish this, I would probably use like a spray acrylic or something like that. I wouldn't want to mess around with putting anything too thick on it. Or trying to get in all those little fussy little areas. Alright, so there's the first layer of green. Let's go in with some blue and kind of darken up the lower spots. Bring that up. And then I want to darken the kind of inner pieces in here to accentuate like the boss of it, like how high it's sticking up. And let's have that fade to a nice light yellow here. And then I'm going to come up with some orangey brown on this side.
Like sushi bond or something like that. Sushi bond, where they burn it
Shoshudi
and
bond?
dye it, something like
Yeah, did they dye it after that? I forget how that goes actually. It's been a while since I looked into that. Yeah, yeah, kind of, right? Because they're accentuating the texture of the wood, and then they're okay. All right. So there we go. So this is just using within the same dye step, because I don't have the option to sand back here. If I'm adding color, it's got to be all in one go. So I've added some blue there, and then I find that's a little bit too bright blue, so I'm going to come in with some dark. And like this. All right. That's fine. Now let's go the other way. Let's add some orange on here. Bring this up to yellow.
don't like your color as you're painting, how would you change it?
Sand it off.
Oh,
Yeah, no, there's no coming back from this one. It's
Sandblasting.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, this was literally a piece of campfire wood. I don't care how this turns out. Be different. Like, this is the thing. You can, with this process, using the dyes and the texturing, it doesn't matter. Like, you can use crappy wood. You can use wood that's from the street. You can use wood that's from the campfire. You can use a piece that you don't care about and you just want to play around with it. It's great. Okay, so this time I did red, and now I'm doing yellow coming up the seam here on this different texture area. You should not dip into your dye box like I'm doing. Do as I say, not as I do. Okay. All right, I think that could look really interesting once it gets some finish on it. I'm not going to keep doing it because it's a little bit boring to watch.
So you're saying then, I noticed that as you're applying it, it's not changing rapidly. So I imagine you're using a light color.
Well, because especially
because it's texture, right?
It's texture because it has the dark highlight on it. I don't want to put anything too dark on it. That's why I'm using like yellows and greens and not blues and reds, because I want that texture highlight, or low light, I guess, to stand out. So once it's dry, I think that would be interesting. And what this is, where did I put it? Oh, here it is. It's not made for Lady Jean's pockets. So this is a little propagation station. So you know if you have like plants or something like that and you want to propagate them, so you put a little plant in there and put it in the sun, and it would just hold a little test tube up on your window ledge, so you don't have to have it in a big jar of water. So that's what that is going to be. So that's using what?
It's different.
Yeah, it's
what you have just done, like, to that piece is unbelievable.
well, it's turned it from like a crappy piece of firewood into something that's also kind of weird looking, but it looks organic, I think. It's not cartoony looking. That's a plan. Like, it's not coming out, you're not coming back with like these colors, you know, these cartoon colors. It's very organic looking. And all I'm doing is I'm painting it with the dye, and then if I'm finding, okay, it's like I found the green was a little bit too fresh, so I came in with just a touch of red, and that kind of toned it down a little bit. And here I painted, I wanted the sides to kind of go farther back, so I painted that the darker red and did the yellow on the top. It's like atmospheric perspective. If you look outside, you'll see yellow close up, but as you look into the distance, if you're looking at mountains, they turn like purpley blue. So it's the same idea. Things that are yellow seem closest, then red, then blue, then purple. That's like a, you know, brain thing. You can't help that. Oh yeah, then I was gonna go and do this one. Normally I'd wash my hands and not touch things again because you don't want to be contaminating everything. So here I went for that yellow, and then I'm going to go a darker green on the top. And you know, I'm being careful, but it's not so fussy. Picking up a little more water, taking it down. Finishing up with yellow here. I would suggest, you don't have to, I would suggest you take your dye to the edge every time, even if it's with water. If there's a little bit of dye left in the water and you stop before you get to the edge, you're going to see it. You don't want to see any lines when you're doing this. So then I'm going to take this brown orangey color coming up here. My experience is just chase that drying edge all the way back to the end of the piece. Or fade it out with water all the way to the center of the piece. Just don't have a dark, dry edge. Okay. I find that still looks a little calm, so I'm going to hit it with a little bit more blue, but a diluted blue. And you know, it's picking up that weird grain there a little better. Do you notice already it's looking a little bit nicer? I'm not even gonna, yeah. I might sand this one back too and do it again. Okay. Make this kind of muddy. green color. So what I see now is it's not picking up the dye anymore. I can see that it's puddling. If I continue, I'm literally painting. I'm just putting dye on top. It's not sucking in. So I'm gonna let this dry and for that water to come out before I do any more colors. I think that, so we can wait for that to dry. Do you have any more? Oh no, I gotta run. Okay, so how to save a run, that's good actually. How to save a run, just go with it, just do the whole thing. There's no coming back unless you paint the whole thing, right? And you don't want to have, the worst thing to have is the dry lines. So even if all I do is paint it with water, at least I'm not going to end up with an ugly line in the middle of it. It's, you know, and I kind of wanted to do that. Actually, no, I am going to do that. A little bit of a, yeah, it's a design opportunity. Up to you, too.
What would happen if you have fluid in your work? Can you wipe it with a paper towel or something to remove it?
What do you mean? Like if you spill your coffee in it?
Well, you know, like what caused the line that you're worried about?
I remember I said it was puddling, and I held it up to show the sheen.
Okay.
I think what happened is that puddle drifted out.
Okay. Now, before you go there, if you were to wipe it.
I would, you know what, I would still do it because the dye adheres so rapidly, and because the outside edge was dry. If the outside edge was wet, yeah, I might try just drying it up and then expect that it would diffuse into the water around it if I dried that area, or that the water more correctly would diffuse into the dried area. But in this case, because it slipped out onto the dried area, if I just try to wipe it up,
I understand.
yeah. So I also found that red too cartoony anyway, so that gave me an opportunity to add a little bit more orange to it and kind of ground it with a little bit of this creamy brown color. And you don't have to do, actually, yeah, I'll sand this back and I'll show you. You don't have to do these solid washes. You can mess around with it, create like an interesting gradient. It makes it look like it's shimmery. It makes it look like it's a weird piece of wood. How's this one? This one, I think when it dries, it's going to turn really light, and it's not going to be as nice. So let's sand this back a bit. Oh yeah, see there, I spilled some dye in it, and there's no, I would have to return that. That's so concentrated and so deep. But this is, it's going to be a fly agaric mushrooms, the one with the white dots on it, so I'll just put design opportunity, just put a white drop over that.
The difference with colored stains is they don't go as deep, I guess, right? And they kind of give a muddy finish.
The difference between colored stains.
Colored stains and dyes.
Yeah, so a stain would be a pigment in some kind of like polyurethane or water suspension, and it's sitting on the surface. So something like a stain would be, it depends on what you're using. So like let's take paints, because you can use oil paint, mix it with polyurethane and make a stain. And the pigments in those, most of them, not things like phthalo blue or there's another violet, those are coal-derived, like the aniline dyes. But if you're doing something that's like a yellow ochre or raw umber, burnt sienna, things like that, those are physical dyes. Those are like, it's not molecules, it's particles, and they're going to sit on the surface. So yeah, you wouldn't necessarily get a muddy finish, but you're not going to show the chatoyancy necessarily as well. That's why people really like applying penetrating oil-based finishes to the wood. Because they're going to like seep in deeper, and you're still going to get the chatoyancy. I find, and my experience with water-based is that it just like it's film finishing, and you don't get the depth. But other people probably have more experience doing larger projects with that. Mine's just on smaller projects. So when I'm doing dyeing, I'm not going to continue. This one, because I put the water on it already, it's lighter on the surface, so there's no point really, because that was to show you how strongly it uptakes at the on the end grain. Maybe I'll just put a wash of red on it. What I was going to say, at the end of the dyeing process, I generally like to finish with a uniform wash, because I think that if you do all these different colors and all these different layers, it's good to give it a light sand, and normally I would clean it off better than this, and do a final light single color wash over it just to unify it. If there's any, slight variations, everything will be grounded out, and then you won't notice it as much. I like this color. This is turning out great. I like this better than the color that was on it. So before I had a mix of reds and yellows, I think I just like it with the red. I like that it's darker red at the top, and you can see a little bit here better how it's sucking in that end grain more. All right. Gun. Design opportunity. Yes, that's because I said I like that color. Using this big brush and these big containers, these little containers are not super bright. So, again, like I said before, when you make a mistake, just make the mistake everywhere. Let's see, a little bit of blue, so I'm going to add a little bit of more blue in different spots around it. That might actually be interesting because there is some little variations of green in here. So I'm really having to scrub it in because the wood was dry when I added the colors. You don't want to let that dry line sit, so I'm really scrubbing it in to move it. You know what? I'm okay with this. That's also an okay color. I didn't like it when it was bright red. This is a much more meaty, earthy kind of color. And this is the spot where I got the drop, and it's not. I think that blends in okay. Okay. So what I would do with that is, for this one, I probably will put an oil finish on it because I would like it to be a little bit warmer. For this one, I am going to stop there, but look how, didn't that come out like kind of cool? I think, where's my little, there, little propagation station. So that's a color when it's dried. That one I'll probably put a water base or like a rattle can of an acrylic on it because I want it to keep that light color. I don't want to go any more yellow with that. And this one, I don't think I'm going to bore you with it anymore. It's just, I'm going to sand it back, keep doing layers and layers and layers of color on it. And I'll bring it in next week and show you how the finished product, I'll bring all of these in and show you how the finished product looks. I'm going to turn this up because it's like the hot seat. That covers blending, how to do side-by-side color without bleeding, how darker dyes affect the woods. So here you can see that vibrant green became a much more muted natural green. How to draw out figure in the wood. So use opposite colors if you want to get it really black, or just use a darker color, sand back, and then a lighter color again. When you're testing it, I really like these maple cards, but you could do swatches. It's just a lot easier for me to store these than to store giant blocks. And besides, these are for writing phone numbers and notes and things. When you're testing it, also test out your finishes. Shellac I found really good. Lacquer I don't have as much experience with, but it doesn't seem to change the color as much. Anything that's oil, especially you wouldn't use linseed oil. You don't know, that's going to turn so yellow, you don't know. So shellac, acrylic spray. This was done with an acrylic spray only. That works really well. And if I am using a poly finish, I put shellac under it. The shellac flakes, the dewaxed shellac. That's what I can think about that. If you guys have questions, I can talk about that, or if you want to know a little bit more about the texturing, I can briefly go into that too. How's that?
Thank you very much, Nicole. That was really informative.
Yes.
And I'm not a paint person, and you've just intrigued me. Or a stain person. You have just intrigued me with the way you transform that piece there. You
can do it in a natural way. I think a lot of people think color and they're thinking like blues and purples and yellows, very vibrant.
That just fascinates me.
But
Good job, Nicole.
Thank you.
everybody way past their bedtime.
Oh, sorry.
So if you gentlemen would please put your seat in your chair.